So let me share a little bit about what our plans are for the evening. If you joined us last week, you'll know this structure, and we're going to do the same, similar structure at least, where we'll have about 15 minutes of meditation here in the beginning, and we'll ask everyone just to mute yourself. And I'm going to read a poem at the beginning of the meditation just for us to reflect on and give a little bit right before, and then we'll move into silence. And then we'll open it up, and Will's going to do a sharing for about 30 minutes. Then we'll have a guided meditation, and then we'll move into the small groups again. And we may have people joining us as we go along, so we'll just welcome them with our hearts as they come in. You can just say hi. Remember that if you have anything technologically or questions, you can put them in the chat box or comments that's down at the bottom of your screen. And then also at the very end, we plan to have time for any plenary Q&R, so we'll all be able to share a little bit, or whoever wants to. Sound good?
Sounds good.
So let us just now, I invite you to move into a time of meditation and some silence. And like I said, I'll start with a little reading. So I invite you to close your eyes or have a gentle gaze to the floor or to your computer or desktop, whatever works for you. And just settling into your heart center, into your breath, finding that refuge in your heart. And this sharing that I'll open us with comes from Terry Tempest Williams. Not really a poem, it's more of an interaction she had with someone for us to reflect on at this time with so much going on in the world. She says, a good friend of mine said, "You are married to sorrow." And I looked at him and said, I am not married to sorrow. I just choose not to look away. And I think there is a deep beauty in not averting our gaze. No matter how hard it is, no matter how heartbreaking it can be, it is about presence. It is about bearing witness. I used to think bearing witness was a passive act. I don't believe that anymore. I think that when we are present, when we bear witness, when we do not divert our gaze, something is revealed. The very marrow of life is revealed. We change. A transformation occurs. Our consciousness shifts. So just taking that wisdom into our hearts as we move into our meditation and our time of prayer, our time of silence, in whatever practice is right for you.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. And what I'm going to do this evening is speak a little bit about when we began this course, we began by talking about quantum physics a little bit. You've all heard about quantum physics. You all know that it's one of these great mysterious branches of physics that has some relationship to spirituality, and there's a kind of sense of quantum being a synonym for spiritual, like quantum healing, quantum medicine, quantum anything is kind of good and cool. And so why is that? And what's it all about? And what I'm going to speak to this evening is just one aspect of it, which is this whole idea of quantum entanglement. I want to explain what it is physically, in terms of what it is essentially in physics, and then what it is in terms of spirituality and really what we're here for. Why is it important? So let me begin by saying that let's talk about the essence of quantum physics, or at least one aspect of it. When we spoke last time, I spoke about, if you remember, and if you weren't here, don't worry, because this will be very brief, but basically we talked about what is called the wave-particle duality. And the bottom line, when it comes to physical reality, is that when we look through the lens of quantum physics, physical reality seems to have these two features. So for example, the electron seems to have this intrinsic dual nature. If you look at it one way, meaning if you experiment on it in a particular way, it behaves like a particle, like a tiny little dot, a little grain of sand, microscopic, of course, subatomic scale, but it seems to behave like a tiny little particle. But if you look at it in another way, it behaves like a wave. And the two are rarely ever seen together. In other words, you can look one way and it behaves like a particle, look another way, it behaves like a wave. And when you're not looking, you don't know where it is, because in quantum physics, there's what's called the wave function. And so the location of this particle can be in a number of different possible places. This is very, very different from the traditional classical physics view, which is that everything is somewhere at any given moment. Like you may have lost your keys in your house, but you know they're somewhere. They're not in several different potential places. They're in one place, and you haven't found them yet until you get to that place. It's not the same in quantum physics. The keys are kind of, at least mathematically, they're in several places partially all at once. And they only show up in one particular place when you do an experiment and you actually try to observe them. And then suddenly they show up in your drawer, they show up in the car, they show up, somehow fallen in the backyard. And that reminds me of that beautiful story where the man is lost his key and he's looking for the key. You may have heard this Sufi story. It's one of the mullah stories. And the mullah is looking for his keys, and his friend is there, and he says, and he's looking all around in the street light, and he says, well, are you sure you lost him here? And he said, well, no, I don't think so. And he said, well, where do you think you lost him? Well, I think it was somewhere back there. And he said, well, why are you looking here? He said, well, because this is where the light is. It's the only place where I can see. So, that's a kind of a goofy story, but it bears some relationship to this, that quantum physics is almost that strange, that when we are not looking for the electron, it's kind of everywhere. And then when we look for it, it suddenly turns up in a particular place. This is called the so-called collapse of the wave function. So anyway, to just kind of cut to the chase here, the basic idea of the wave-particle duality then is that there is these two aspects to the nature of physical reality, which is totally contrary to, in a sense, both classical physics and our everyday world kind of experience of reality, as I was saying about the keys. And so in a similar sense, what emerged out of the understanding of this wave-particle duality is that reality is different and more multifaceted and complex than our everyday reality tells us. And this is really one of the reasons why quantum physics is so important, that the physical universe as it appears to us is not actually how it is. This is the key. And that it's more complex than that. And so in the case of the wave particle duality, if you think about it for a moment like a human being, there's a kind of a simplistic parallel, but it's legitimate, it has validity. And that is, a human being has a physical body, right? So that sort of corresponds to your particle nature. You have a very particular physical body, and it's always at some particular place in time. And as it moves about, once it moves, it's no longer where it was. It's always in one place only at any given time. And it's a very definable entity. And it moves around at a certain speed, and it has a certain position and speed of movement at all moments. Well, in a similar way, that's the classical understanding of the electron. The quantum physics understanding is that the electron has this wave-like nature, and actually it has an awareness of the rest of the other electrons and actually the rest of the universe. And so in a certain sense, the electron is connected, if you will. It's got some kind of vibratory connection to all of the other particles and in the universe, all of the other entities in the universe, because it's really fields that we're talking about. We'll talk about that a little later, quantum fields as opposed to particles. But in any case, the bottom line here is that the electron has this dual nature, and the human being also does as well. The human being has what you could call a wave-like nature, which is our emotional nature, and is certainly our spiritual nature, in which we extend beyond our physical body. And there's a sense in which we are aware of our environment. Our awareness has more of a wave-like nature. And it extends beyond our sort of physical presence, obviously. And in a certain sense, our spiritual intuition and our spiritual insight and experience take us far beyond the physical body in many ways, as well as even our emotional experience and our interconnection with others, our experience of love and joy and awe, and all of these different invisibly, they're invisible experiences of consciousness, and they have more of a wave-like nature. So I don't want to make too much of that, other than to say that even the wave particle duality of the electron makes it more human-like. And actually, the physicist David Bohm says that the electron is more like a unit of consciousness than a unit of matter. It behaves more like a unit of consciousness, and it has an awareness. And it's as if it's making decisions based on its awareness of its environment. So anyway, that's one key aspect. Another key aspect is that what is revealed through quantum physics is that there is no material stuff. There's really only vibrating patterns of energy and information. And so the nature of the universe as it appears to us as kind of solid and fixed, and maybe fluid in certain ways, but very definite. We know that the trees are there and the ground is there and the river is flowing, and all of these perceptions that we see, and the clouds are moving in the sky, and that the ground appears to be absolutely solid, and our bodies feel very solid and real. And what we learn from quantum physics is that matter is actually mostly empty space, that the universe is almost entirely empty space. So I'll give you an example. If you take a hydrogen atom, the classic atom of a single proton in the center and an electron whirling around. And if you sort of expand that so it's the size of a soccer field, so that you kind of blow it up so you can have a look at it. Now, of course, the electron is not actually in any one particular place. As I was saying, it has the tendency to exist in this whole kind of electron cloud around the proton, but it has a high probability of being in a certain region, and which means that gives a sense of where it mostly is. And if you then look at the size of the electron based on where it mostly is, and the size of the proton, it turns out that the proton would be in this soccer field. So you have the electron on a goal line, and you would have the proton is on the other goal line. The proton is about the size of the tiniest pinhead that you could see. And the electron is much bigger. It's probably about the size of a soccer ball. And so you have the soccer ball sort of representing the electron on the one goal line, and you have a pinhead representing the proton on the other goal line, and all the rest is empty space. And so actually that's the structure of the hydrogen atom, and all atoms have this similar structure in which they are consisting of a very dense and tiny nucleus with some electrons at quite a large distance from that nucleus rotating around, and everything else in between is pure vacuum or empty space. So this is the nature of material stuff, is that matter is mostly empty. And what is emerging out of quantum field theory, which we'll talk about in a subsequent talk, but very briefly, is that everything, the nature of reality as current physics understands it, is as these vibrating fields of energy and information, interconnected. And we'll talk about that more later, but it's essentially a kind of like an ocean, a fluid ocean of energy and information everywhere, even including in empty space. There may be not so much energy as there is information in the empty space, but the idea that's emerging is completely different from our traditional material understanding of the universe. And so, and what this points toward is this whole understanding that the universe is non-local. And that has a very particular meaning in physics, or at least a particular origin, which I want to speak to briefly. But non-local means that there is an immediate and direct, instantaneous interconnection between each point in the universe and every other point in the universe. It's a different type of interconnection from what we are experiencing, for example, now with the coronavirus, where we're recognizing that's very clear that we are all one human family, and we all have a similar biological organism. So there's a fundamental interconnection, right? And that's why this virus is so contagious, because we all have the similar biological systems. And so there's an interdependence there. But it still travels within a classical physics type of framework. You know, the little virus has to be picked up from somewhere. And if it's not picked up and you're free of it, then you don't get that affliction. Whereas the nature of non-locality is different. Non-locality means that everything is somehow part of the one that is, if you will. Now you can begin to see why this is important in terms of spirituality, because I'm sort of jumping ahead, so I won't say more than to just say that this is pointing towards things that we talk about all the time in spiritual circles, about the oneness of reality. And physics is beginning to unveil that and reveal even contrary, highly contrary perceptions, or reality being highly contrary to our ordinary perception. And even someone as great as Albert Einstein, who obviously was one of the greatest scientists who ever lived, but he was very uncomfortable with this non-locality. And just to give a little bit of history here, he actually is kind of responsible for the discovery of it in a certain way, because he was trying to disprove the implications of quantum physics by giving an example, which is called the EPR paradox, or the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox. And very briefly, it's quite simple in concept, and so it sounds fancy, but basically you have these two coupled photons that are released from an emitter. So a photon is just basically a single particle of light. And so you have these, and when they're emitted at the same time, they're connected in their spin, meaning that there's two of them, and one goes spin up and one is spin down like this. And they separate, and you send them, and they go out at the speed of light. So if you send them in opposite directions, so you send one out to, you know, a star, 100 billion galaxies in one direction, 100 billion light years in one direction, and, well, not maybe 100 billion, let's just say a billion light years. So a billion light years in one direction and the other a billion light years in the other direction. Now, at that moment, these two photons are vastly distant in space, right? There's a huge distance between them. It turns out if you measure the spin of the one, that you automatically know the spin of the other. So if you measure the spin of one of them and it's, let's say, spin up, then you automatically know the other one is spin down. And this is something that Einstein brought forward and said, this doesn't make any sense. This contradicts reality. Now, when you first hear that, you think, well, of course you knew that because it's a spin zero game. And so an analogy might be, so you think, why is that so surprising? That shouldn't be surprising. It's kind of like if you took two gloves, you have a right and a left glove, and you put them in a sealed envelope, right? And you can't then see which one is the right or the left. But you have them in these sealed envelopes, and then you send them flying off into vastly different space, just like you did the photons, 100 billion miles apart, light years apart. Well, then when you open the one envelope and you find that it's a right-handed glove, then you automatically know that the other one is a left-handed glove. So what's the big deal? There's nothing surprising about that because it had to be that way because it went out from the source that way. Well, it turns out that that's not correct. That is not how quantum physics works. How quantum physics works is that in each of those envelopes, the rightness or the leftness of the glove is not yet decided until you make the measurement. So when you send out those two envelopes, each of which has a glove in it, and they're connected, the only thing that's decided is that they are opposite. One is for right and one is for left when you measure it. That much is determined. But which is going to be which is not yet determined. So it's as if in each envelope you had this mystical glove that's sort of floating there as possibly right, possibly left. Then you send them, and both of them are that way, you send them then this vast distance apart. Then you do this measurement. In this case, you open the envelope, and suddenly it turns out to be a right-handed glove. Then you automatically know the other one's a left-handed glove. The reason that that is so shocking in a physics experiment context is that it violates the whole principle that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. This was Einstein's. This comes out of Einstein's relativity theory. And so even if these were so far apart, normally you have to have a signal that carries information because when that one measurement is made, suddenly there's a determination has been made. The one glove has been revealed to be a right-handed glove. Now we know the other one, way far away, is a left-handed glove. But there's not enough time to send information that we opened the envelope here to reach that other envelope. So somehow it instantaneously knew, without having a signal to travel there, to tell it that we've opened the envelope and it's been determined here, and therefore you are been, now we know what you will be, or now you become that. Because what happened at that distant glove is determined by the fact that we opened the envelope here. And yet, even if there's not enough time, even at the speed of light, for a signal to travel to inform that other envelope, somehow it's determined. So I know that's a little kind of convoluted, and it sounds like, well, so what? The essence of it is this, that what this reveals is that in physics, there is this direct, instantaneous connection between those two gloves. The minute you measure one, the other one is instantaneously determined. And this is what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. To him, it was like, it can't be like that. It's too weird. And it's not that way. But what's happened is that in quantum physics, this has been proven. It was actually mathematically demonstrated as it had to be this way by a man named John Bell. And then it was later proven in experiments in 1982, which have been refined since then, to actually demonstrate that this is the case, that there is this amazing quality to the nature of reality, where what's happening at this point, at a particular point in space-time, has, in a certain way, a direct connection, instantaneous, to what's happening somewhere else in space-time, and that the two are more connected than just with one sending a signal, but there's an instantaneous and direct oneness to the two, that there's a way in which tampering with the one thing immediately affects the other instantaneously, no matter how far away it is. So this is a really beautiful idea that begins to point to essentially the oneness of all that is. And this is part of where we begin to see why these insights from quantum physics are making such an impact, and are both confusing materialists because they don't make any sense, and they're forcing a kind of reevaluation of the whole nature of reality in science itself. Now, Thomas Berry, the great geologian, as he calls it, theological geologist, if you will, has a beautiful way of putting this. He says, the cosmos is not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. A collection of objects is a set of separate things, all of which relate to each other perhaps, or bounce around and bump off of each other or whatever, but they are basically separate entities that interact in some way. But he says the universe is not that. It's not a collection of objects. It's a communion of subjects. A subject is a self-aware being. And a communion is a kind of interpenetrating mutual awareness, and even possibly an empathic connection, even an empathic resonance, if you will, which is how we know the human consciousness is structured. We know that human beings, when they come into the presence of other human beings, there's an interconnection with our psyches to where we are influenced at that level of consciousness. And there's a way in which our consciousness begins to merge with the consciousness of another, and begins to be impacted by it, that goes beyond our physical bodies. And in a certain, and yet each one of us is a subject. We are a perceiving, aware being. And so Thomas Berry says the universe is a collection, is a communion of subjects. And this is why I mentioned, I think last time, I like to think that quantum entanglement might one day be replaced perhaps by a more accurate and spiritually nuanced and ultimately kind of spiritually accurate, if you will, term of quantum communion, of the fact that all souls are connected into some kind of communion, not just the souls of human beings, but the souls of all forms of manifestation. They have a spiritual quality, a spiritual presence, not just a physical presence, but a spiritual presence. When you walk through the nature in forests and you feel the presence of the trees and the spirit of the land, and you feel the spirit of the animals, you feel the spirit of the wind and the sky, and there's a kind of communion with these other dimensions of consciousness, which are also alive. There's an aliveness, and that aliveness interacting with aliveness. That is what in physics is called quantum entanglement. And it's an important term because it means that all things are interconnected with one another. And quantum communion gives a different quality to the nature of that entanglement, which is that it's kind of an embrace. All things embrace one another. Now, why does this matter? And what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is that as I said, that the science is moving toward unveiling the nature of spirituality and spiritual reality. Now, this may seem a little extreme, and a lot of scientists would disagree with this, but there are also more and more, and we'll be looking at other dimensions of this as we continue with this Monday night series, more and more evidence that is really challenging the mainstream scientific understanding of the nature of the world, the nature of life, the nature of the universe. And so, in particular, quantum physics shows that matter, energy, space, and time are not what we thought. They're not absolutes. And it's really unraveling this whole thing. It's showing us that the separateness, what we call the locality of classical physics, is not accurate. It's actually an inaccurate model of the nature of reality. And the reason this is so important for us who are committed to spiritual life is that science itself is disproving its own materialist metaphysics. it is actually, the cutting edge of scientific data is actually starting to align more strongly and more deeply with the great sayings of the mystics across the traditions, across all the religions. And if we talk about the unity of the spiritual and religious traditions, we come to certain principles that are articulated, for example, in the unity principle. There's one presence, there's one being, there is this oneness, and it's present everywhere, and it's alive, and it basically is the cause and the foundation of all that is. This isness is increasingly being pointed to from science itself, which in many ways began with the premise that spirituality and religion are completely false, and we need to go back to practical, experimentally verified realities that we can prove in the laboratory. And what's happening is that science itself is beginning to sound at its cutting edge and beginning to reveal that the nature of matter, energy, and space and time are more like what the mystics have been telling us for thousands of years than like what we thought up until fairly recently through science itself. So science itself is disproving its own materialist metaphysical orthodoxy. That's very exciting. And as I said, many would disagree with that, but many are really pointing in that direction. And there's a whole new council for what's called non-materialist science, which a group of scientists have started, an association for the advancement of non-materialist science, which is really quite exciting. And I'm fortunate to be joining it. And we are, but they're more involved than I am. But basically, it's all about really developing this new science of consciousness and taking seriously the implications of the cutting edge of quantum physics and really of many other fields of science. So we will be looking at some of that as we continue with our course series, this Monday night series. So what I'd like to do now is to just do a short guided meditation drawing on some of these ideas. And this will be a little different from our normal silent meditation. So what I want to invite you to do is to just gently close your eyes. And just take a couple of deep breaths, centering yourself. And I'll begin with the reading from the Chandogya Upanishad. I was reminded of it this morning in our morning meditation, and then I came to it later in the day and just want to bring it forward now. It reads like this. In the center of your heart, no bigger than the size of your thumb, is a secret dwelling, the lotus of the heart. Within that dwelling is a space, and within that space is the fulfillment of all desires. As great as the infinite space beyond is the space within the lotus of the heart. Both heaven and earth are contained in that inner space. Both fire and air, sun and moon, lightning and stars. Whether we know it in this world or know it not, everything is contained in that inner space. Never fear that old age will invade that space. Never fear that this inner treasure of all reality will wither and decay. This knows no age when the body ages. This knows no dying when the body dies. This is your true self, free from old age, free from death, free from grief, hunger, and thirst. In this self, all desires are fulfilled. So I'd like you to just imagine now this space more as a presence rather than trying to visualize it right now. And as the Upanishad says, very interesting, it says no bigger than the size of your thumb. That gives you a hint as to the level of concentration of awareness. So you want to think of just holding your awareness as a space in your heart about the size of your thumb. It's not huge. It's not tiny, but it's pretty concentrated. Center your attention there. and bring all of your awareness to focus on this center. And now imagine for a moment that this space in your heart is a gateway to the infinite, to the vast cosmos beyond, as the Upanishad says. And as you focus inward with your awareness, now allows an image to come in your mind of the night sky with its billions of galaxies, each galaxy itself having a billion stars. The estimate is there are about 100 billion galaxies, and each one of them has about 100 billion stars. And as you gaze out upon this sky, this light is reaching your eyes from all these different stars. And these stars are spaced millions of light years apart. As you look from one side of the sky to the other side of the sky, you're looking across vast distances of the universe. And those vast distances are replicated in miniature right inside your eyeball. So you are literally seeing the light year dimensions, the billions of light years across of the entire universe as you gaze across the night sky. And not only are you seeing this vast physical expanse of the universe, but you're also seeing the vast temporal expanse. The history of the universe is also replicated inside the tiny space of your eye. Because when you look upon the night sky, you are not seeing the universe as it is now, but as it was in long past times, ancient times, when the photons that you're seeing were first created. So consider for a moment the life of one of these little photons that you're seeing that's lighting up in your eye right now, coming from a distant supernova star 70 million light years away. So that little photon, that little corpuscle of light, was born 70 million years ago. And when it came into existence, it immediately began racing through space at 300,000 kilometers per second. That's the speed of light, fast enough to zip around the equator of the Earth 7 times in less than a second. And at this breakneck speed, this little photon started its journey back at the end of the Mesozoic era, when the dinosaurs were proudly lumbering upon the Earth. And as this photon kept racing toward the Earth over the next 5 million years, the dinosaurs went extinct, probably caused by a meteor that crashed into the Earth. And then mammals began to appear. And in 5 million years, squirrels, herons, and storks appeared. And then in another 5 million years, rabbits. And another 5 million years, monkeys appeared. And all the while, this little photon is continuing its journey across space. Then another 30 million years passed, and the first chimpanzee walked the Earth. Another 8 million years, the first bipedal hominids appeared. And our little photon is faithfully racing its way toward the Earth. 12 more million years pass, and the early Neanderthal Homo sapiens appeared. Then another 200,000 years, and the early humans painted the Altamira cave paintings. And then after another 20,000 years, writing was first developed in Sumeria. Now our little photon is nearing the end of its long journey. It's a mere 6,000 light years away from its destination. In these last few moments of the photon's vast journey, we witness the rise and fall of all ancient human civilizations. And then we move right up to the last few hundred light years, in which we see the rise of modern industrial civilization. And finally, when the photon is only tens of light years from its destination, having completed 99.999% of its life, you were born. And throughout your entire childhood, youth, and adulthood, this little photon kept racing toward you. And eventually, that special moment came one night when you stepped out on the deck to enjoy the stars. And as you look up, that little photon enters the pupil of your eye, travels the last 2 centimeters of its journey, and then gives up its life on your retina. This tiny luminous being, born when the dinosaurs roamed the Earth, and then traveling at the speed of light for 70 million years, now dies in order that you may see. It becomes transformed into a tiny electrical pulse in your optic nerve, which relays to your brain a direct visual report from that particular supernova all those eons ago. So when you gaze at the night sky, you are literally embracing the vast, ancient history of the entire universe. The vast expanses and the vast history are somehow contained within the tiny space of your eyeball. And so as this happens, what is this eye in which these photons are coming into you? What exactly is it? Let's follow that photon a little further. It becomes an electrical impulse which moves to your brain, and it is there absorbed as energy into your body. Well, what is your body? And what is its structure? Your body is composed of 5 billion atoms. Now, that's a lot of atoms, right? But just how big a number is it? Well, imagine that each atom were the size of a pea, you know, that little green food that we love to eat. Or some of us don't like peas, most of us do. But how big a pile of peas would you need to equal the number of atoms in your body? Suppose you filled your entire house floor to ceiling with peas. Would that be enough? Not even close. Suppose you filled every building with peas in the city of Vancouver. Would that be enough? Not even close. And so let's say we covered the entire nation of Canada with peas up to your neck. I mean, that's a lot of peas, right? We're covering the entire country of Canada, one of the biggest countries in the world with peas. Would this be enough? Not even close. So let's cover the entire earth, land and sea, up to our necks in peas. That's a lot of peas. That's 1.5 meters of peas across the entire surface of the earth. Surely that's enough. Again, it's not even close. It turns out that you would need 1 million Earth-sized planets, each the same size as Earth, each one covered neck deep in peas in order to equal the number of atoms in your body. And as we said earlier, if you zoom in on any one of those atoms, at the core of it is the nucleus, which is like a tiny little diamond, if you will. And then this vast empty space, and then these electrons that are whirling around. All the rest is empty. Imagine now that you have these 5 billion atoms, 5 billion atoms, 5 times 10 to the 27, in your body. And most of them are little points of light with this vast empty space. So that if you looked at your body with an electron microscope, what would it look like? It would look exactly like looking out on that night sky. Large stretches of empty space punctuated by little points of light, which are the protons and the electrons. And all the rest is empty space. So your atoms are clustered in various ways, just like the stars are clustered in various ways, and they swirl about here and there in organized structures. But most of it is empty space. So you are something like a child's dot figure, a huge array of points of light separated by vast empty spaces, and only when you connect the dots does the form appear and you come alive. And what is it that connects these dots? What is the relationship? What holds it all together? It's love. In science, what holds it all together are called forces, and they're given various technical names: electromagnetic, gravitational, strong and weak nuclear forces. But in truth, they are all just so many forms of love. You are made of tiny points of light, all woven together by love in a perfect tapestry. This love is the same love that holds the planets and the galaxies together. You are a galaxy of light, knit together by love. And you are in turn held in the embrace of love by the earth, which is held in the embrace of love by the sun, which is held in the embrace of love by the galaxy, the Milky Way, which is held in the embrace of love by the supercluster. the Laniakea supercluster, which is held in the embrace of love by the infinite supreme mystery we call God. There's a Sufi saying, I was a hidden treasure. This is God speaking. This is a hadith. Hadith means the words of God speaking as revealed to the prophet. But the hadith is this. The voice of God says, I was a hidden treasure and longed to be loved, and so I created the universe. Feel this treasure now that is you. Feel yourself as a microcosmic replication of the vast treasure of the cosmos itself. That just as your eye contains, when you look out on the night sky, it somehow replicates the vast expanse as well as the ancient history of the entire universe inside your eyeball, inside your being. You are a microcosmic manifestation of this vast and treasured universe. This treasure was created by God in order to reveal the treasure that God is. The secret song in your heart is the entire universe singing. The galaxy that is you and the galaxies that comprise the universe are one living treasure, the body of God, which we call the universe. It's all one galaxy of light knit together by love. So as you're ready, just gently allow your eyes to open again. And I think we're going to go into small groups again for a bit, and then we'll come back for some closing questions and reflections.
So as you move into your small groups, it's just a time to be together and share what's on your heart from all that was already shared tonight, from all that it may be the meditation or the talk or wherever you're coming from. And what do you think? Groups of 3 or 4?
I think groups of 4.
Groups of 4, yeah. And if you're with your partner or in a family and you want to move to another computer, you should do that now. Otherwise, you'll be in a larger group.
Which is fine.
Which is
you
fine.
Don't need to move.
And you'll have about 20 minutes approximately, 20 to 25 maybe.
Only 25
and
minutes.
We'll give you time markers along the way, saying halfway point, 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes. And so just stay tuned to that as it pops up onto your computer, and share the time. Share the time with each other and make sure that every voice can be heard.
And this is a chance to connect with one another, to share whatever has been stirred by this talk, by this meditation, and also to address the question, how do you experience this oneness, this fundamental, innate, immediate interconnection with all that is, with all beings, and with the very foundation of the universe? So in whatever way you feel drawn to speak to that about your own experience, how do you experience quantum entanglement, if we could call it that way, or the communion with this hidden treasure that is the universe and that is you?
And you may want to relate that to this current time of whatever's going on for you around what's going on in the world, what's going on in the universe right now. However you choose to share is fine. So Garrett, are we ready?
We are ready.
We are ready. The voice
Okay.
from the Unity
So here
box.
you go. Take the plunge and show up in your new small groups.
Hello,
Anyway,
welcome back,
everyone. Yeah.
Nice to see you, and I hope you got
back.
some connection time with each other. Yeah, I think everyone, a couple people had to leave early, so they sent their regrets. I posted in the the Zoom chat, the opening meditation that I read, the thing from Terry Tempest Williams. And then also we will send out, wondering how we'll do it. Actually, maybe Garrett, if you could get on the Sachana website and see if you can find the PDF for Song of the Earth, because there's a PDF version. That meditation that Will did is written up in a book that he edited. It's a beautiful book, and you can buy it. I think it's at Unity Church, actually, at Unity Center, but there's also a free version PDF that if Garrett, if you're able to post it for everyone so they'd have the link to that, that'd be great. If not, then we'll get it to you and you can read the book and also have that meditation. So we wanted to open it up just for some questions, reflections, comments, responses, that sort of thing. Yes, Jim.
So I believe my understanding quantum physics is insufficient, because I totally get the idea of quantum entanglement between the two electrons or the two gloves, and you only get it when you look at it. I don't see how you leap from that to every glove's connected to every other glove. Every electron, is entangled with every other electron.
Well, that comes out of quantum field theory and really out of the form of the Schrödinger equation. But very briefly, if you have two electrons, each of which has its own wave function, and then they come and interact, those two wave functions interact, and after that, there's the wave function for the system that is an interconnected wave function. So it's like once they come together in some way, then they're sort of interconnected. And since that's one way of looking at it, or another way of looking at it is that the wave function of reality is of the entire cosmos is one interconnected wave, which has within it this sort of the essences energetically and informationally of all the particles in the universe, if you will. So, when we talk about an electron as an isolated entity, like in quantum mechanics, you'll talk about electron, you'll talk about in a particular potential well where it's like bound to an atom or something, so it has particular walls and rigidity. That's the case for which the Schrödinger equation has been solved in detail. But when you then start looking at the larger many-body problem, it becomes far more complex. And so, but the basic idea is that simple example of those two photons interconnected then applies not just to photons, but to particles, to energy, and to all other photons. So there's a quality of, once you have that fundamental interconnectedness between established, then it doesn't just apply to those two hypothetical photons that we're speaking of. It applies to kind of all of the particles and photons of the universe, if you will. I don't know if that explains it very well.
So I guess the point is that we can instantaneously communicate.
That's technically not possible using this particular form of, in quantum physics, it's generally said in the interconnection between the photons that you can't use it as a way to communicate. You cannot use it as a way to transfer information from one point to another, because for that, it's a random process. So the minute you measure the one,
right,
then the other turns out to be determined. But
right,
you can't measure the one and set a set of signals that the other one would immediately receive because they're connected. So it's the measurement itself that collapses the wave function into a particular outcome.
Okay, I got it.
And so even though there's this fundamental interconnection the general understanding in physics is that it cannot be used to communicate at speeds faster than light or instantaneously. However, in the spiritual and mystical interpretations, there's generally a recognition that whereas physics says it can't be used to communicate, it does begin to point to the possibility of mechanisms whereby there could be telepathic or some kind of non-local communicative faculty, which physics doesn't yet know of, which is related to this non-locality. And so there is plenty of speculation about that. And so what is, at least in the things that I've read, Randy's read a lot, he might have some ideas, but from what I've read, the non-locality cannot be used as, traditional kind of Bell's inequality, and this principle of the two photons cannot be used as a way to communicate.
Yeah, I think it depends on the definition of communication, and there's the rub, because the scientists that say it can't be used for communication have a very specific concept in mind, but that precludes that there could be any other type of communication. Perhaps there are forms of communication that would not fit into human modes of communication, but might underlie the concepts of intuition, say, for example. And let me just add on the concept of how everything is entangled. The basic premise that I find most interesting is that everything became entangled at the moment of the Big Bang, and that what we take a look at as when we see and we discover entanglement, we're very thrilled with ourselves that we've been able to demonstrate it using very sort of nascent equipment that only allows us to examine the most minute components of reality. But there is a very strong argument that at the moment of the Big Bang that the entire universe became entangled, and we're just unable to look beyond the most microscopic level. So we then declare that that's all that's happening in the universe.
Yeah, I think that's very good. And also what you said is that physics definition of communication usually means sending information through a kind of signal, like, a radio wave that has an amplitude or a frequency modulation that carries a kind of signal. So when physics talks about communication, they mean a kind of electromagnetic or some other kind of signal that conveys a particular form of data or information. But what Randy's saying, rightly so, is that, first of all, physics doesn't even begin to have an understanding of consciousness. And what we're talking about is that it's possible that this non-locality has something to do with the way the deeper, more subtle dimensions of consciousness work, like intuition, like spiritual awareness. And so awareness and consciousness may well indeed they do have a kind of a non-local phenomenon, and that's verified spiritually and mystically. And they may well indeed one day be shown to be somehow facilitated or related to this non-locality that quantum physics is. Frankly, it's, as Randy's kind of pointing to, it's really at the infancy. I mean, this is a new understanding in physics. It's only, 30, 40 years old, maybe 100 if you go all the way back to Einstein, but it's really only since Bell's theorem that non-locality has been taken seriously. So we're talking really since the mid-60s. And it's making its way slowly into physics, and it's still resisted by many. So it's a long, slow process. Yeah.
I'd like to comment.
Please.
Well, that chart that you show of God, and then to a light, then to being, and then to matter. And so we're at the matter end of things, trying to look up and get all of that. And our experience, and because we're in bodies of perception, we can't get all that, but we can witness the phenomena of it. So when people do their prayer research, when people follow intuitions, as Randy said, or there's other kinds of communication, then we have evidence of something. We know that it's there, but we can't, even putting making it wave or particle wave or electromagnetic is still trying to translate it into a material phenomena, and that we can't comprehend. But it's given us the tools to still witness and observe these things that were considered woo-woo or not observable, now they'll be able to observe them like they do with the prayer research and see results.
That's beautiful. And actually what you're pointing to is one of the challenges in science, which is that there's still this materialist orthodoxy that everything has to be reduced to something that can be understood in terms of the physical processes, the biochemical, nuclear processes, of physical matter, or else it's not real. And in fact, there are these phenomena of consciousness that are every bit as real as the physical phenomena. And our future science will one day embrace that to the point where that the matter domain will have to explain itself to spiritual reality to be considered credible. Otherwise, it would be too woo-woo. The tables will be reversed. I think Carolyn has a question or comment.
And this will be our last one because we're coming up on time. So Carolyn?
You're muted, Carolyn.
Okay, so in light of what's going on in the world right now, what is the practical application for those of us who are wanting to shift or inject positive energy into, into what's going on in the world? I mean, meditating, obviously, but how does it work in the construct that you've presented tonight?
It's a great question. I certainly don't have the answer, but I do feel that what's particularly important is to recognize that the universe does run by love. There is this principle of love that is what we are made of and which has created the entire cosmos, is somehow absolutely essential to moving through this time. And for us to connect with that foundation of love, both in terms of our interpersonal level, but also in terms of the mystical dimension, and to commit to being an instrument of that love and in service to others as best we can in this time. But it's not something that I know the details of. I mean, this is such a vast and really unprecedented moment of what we're coming into, and it has potential consequences that are really quite beyond anything that I think any of us have seen in our lifetime. So what I can say is that across the history of all the religions, there is this cry of the soul to basically root itself in the heart of God, if you will, in the supreme mystery, and to take refuge there as the foundation of ultimate truth. And what I would say is the short answer is that is the most important thing we can do, is to root ourselves there and then to be an instrument of that love as best we're able with those that we're connected to. There may be more, so I will keep contemplating it. I think we're all contemplating that right now.
Can I add a brief comment to that? For me, the discussion of entanglement is an examination of the potential mechanics for the power of prayer and intention. You see, because for the longest time, people have prayed, as Will is saying, and we believe that the nature of the underlying spirit is love. And, there's a lot of science around that too. But a lot of times people wonder, well, how could prayer work? Well, the whole concept, the primary concept that is demonstrated by entanglement is called non-locality, the ability for something to reach out and touch something at a distance with no known means of intervention. So to me, it's so exciting because it shows that we're just, and this may just be the first of the, discoveries that we can point to. I mean, dark matter has implications. All of these are facilities that are becoming known to hardcore science of ways that the power of prayer and the power of intention could in fact influence our reality. And I think it was David Bohm who gave the example that if you consider the two ends of a pencil, the eraser end and the pointed end, that when we turn the pencil at the pointed end, the eraser end turns automatically at the same time. So it wouldn't matter how many millions of light years long that pencil was. When this little particle that makes up the point of the pencil changes, it changes the entire pencil in that moment. And so when we hold thoughts, and particularly when we hold intention and put energy into it, we are changing the whole. So that for me is
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And what I would add to that, which is essentially building on that, is that matter and consciousness themselves are intertwined.
mm-hmm.
So that these two photons that are somehow communicating in a way that physics can't understand, because physics' only understanding of communication is through sending some physical signal like an electromagnetic wave or something. But in fact, there may be a consciousness principle that is operative here, that is also, as Randy's saying, what is essential in the connection between matter and consciousness, which is then the foundation of how prayer works. It's the foundation of how synchronicity works. Synchronicity is that term that Jung, I think, coined, but that they speak of. Synchronicity is that correspondence between physical process and consciousness process that seems acausal. Jung called it an acausal connecting principle. Acausal means non-locality. It means there's not a direct causal link that we can identify. So there's this acausality, there's this non-locality, there's this recognition that there are hidden forces in consciousness that link matter and psyche and soul and spirit in ways that prayer has, and the mystics have spoken of, but it has traditionally been dismissed by sort of rationalist scientists because there's no mechanism. And what you're pointing out, Randy, is that this non-locality provides a potential mechanism for understanding how prayer works. The key is that prayer works, whether we understand the non-locality or not. We need to give ourselves to working with prayer, to continue to take that refuge and to continue to invoke that power of prayer, and especially in a time like this. Mm-hmm. So I think we're at time.
We are at time. So the sincerity of your prayer, the sincerity of your intention, we encourage you to deepen that this week and over the days to come. Use that as your refuge, really deepen into it. I know most of us are online nearly 24/7 these days, definitely 8 to 12 hours a day, many of us are. And so find those spaces to get offline. Come visit us, do what's necessary, and then really close
visit
it
us,
up.
You mean online?
Online, yeah. Not personal, not in person, but online. Come to these things as you can. Journal. This is a really powerful time. So if journaling is part of your practice, then do that. Get out and breathe the air, the fresh air, safely. And do those things that really give nurture. Put on some music and dance. All of these things that can really help deepen. Dance your prayers. Move your prayers. And I know you know these things, but just that encouragement, because it's really important that we're uplifting our spirits. We're only in the beginning of this. And so we've got to ride this wave. So find those ways that you can keep your emotional well-being uplifted too as we move through it.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I just have one more short announcement, so go ahead.
Okay. Jennifer or Garrett, if you could post the link for PayPal and Tithe, and if you're able and willing and it's so inspired, please do donate, because Unity needs this. We all need this financial support, and we really appreciate all your giving and keeping that love offering flowing through the veins of your veins and our veins and Unity's veins and everything else in the blood force that keeps us alive on all levels. And so that's one announcement. The other announcement is that next week for the course, we'll be looking at some of the women mystics, both contemporary and our ancestors of the women mystics, and how they are or would be living through this time in particular in very practical ways. So we'll highlight a few of those women mystics who support us and give us teachings, wisdom teachings of how to move through the time.
Two other things. I see that Maureen has just asked for a recommended book on quantum physics simplified. The one I would recommend is this one. It's called The Physics of God. I don't know if you can see that. Is it?
Maybe backwards.
Is that coming out backwards?
Oh, that's right. It's correct.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so The Physics of God by Joseph Selby. I think we have some in the bookstore.
I don't know if anyone's out, or if Jennifer, you're in the church, if there could be any pick up and drop off through a credit card so you don't see each other. If we don't have them there, Banyan Books is doing that, and Janet did tell us about that you can order through Banyan Books too, in a safe way. Yeah.
The reason I recommend this particular book is because it both presents the quantum physics side, but then it also presents the correlations with the spirituality side better than most books. Most of the quantum physics books focus more on the physics and not as much on the spirituality, so you can't see the links as clearly. And it's fairly simple. It's not too long and hefty, but it still covers the basis. There are lots of good books, and I could maybe develop some resources if people would like. There's also some excellent YouTube documentaries, and Randy, you might have some suggestions about that too. Maybe we could get some ideas, make a resource list for people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think we should close to honor the time. But thank you all for joining us. And, you know, this is a remarkable time to be connecting more deeply inwardly. And we are, as you know, I think most of you know, we have a Monday morning daily meditation. So if you're available, we'll be in silent prayer together from 7 to 7:30, and we come online to do that. Part of the reason we're doing that is because we are in this unique time, and we thought, first of all, it's a way for us to continue to nurture that shared interior, non-local space of the heart together. And by doing that, we're sort of building that space both within ourselves and in our community. And secondly, it also helps us to stay connected and kind of deepen our prayer at this time of such challenge and uncertainty. So welcome you if you can join us. It's for a half hour, 7 to 7:30. And otherwise, we hope to see you online for Sunday service and next Monday for our class.
And Jennifer, Garrett, can you post the link for the meditation or the number? Garrett, you may have that. I don't know if that's readily available. And we'll see you sometime soon. Blessings. God bless.
God bless.
All of you.
Stay safe.
Stay healthy. You are safe. You are healthy in the ultimate reality of it all.
Thank you.